Hi Year 2, I am going to be introducing our new story for this week, and it is called The Worst Witch, and it's written by Jill Murphy. Now, we've read a couple of stories this year which have been written by Jill Murphy. I wonder if you can remember who they are. So I'm going to begin with chapter 1 and chapter 2. So chapter 1, here's the first page. The Worst Witch. Before we start listening to the story, I want you to make a prediction on what you think it might be about. So it's called The Worst Witch. Chapter 1, okay. ISS Cackle's Academy for Witches stood at the top of a high mountain surrounded by a pine forest. It looked more like a prison than a school, with its gloomy grey walls and turrets. Sometimes you could see the pupils on their broomsticks flitting like bats above the playground wall, but usually the place was half hidden in mist, so that if you had glanced up at the mountain, you would probably not have noticed that the building was there at all. Everything about the school was dark and shadowy. There were long, narrow corridors and winding staircases. And of course, there were the girls themselves, dressed in black gym slips, black stockings, black hobnailed boots, grey shirts and black and grey ties. Even their summer dresses were black and grey. The only touches of colour were the sashes around their gym slips, a different colour for each house, and the school badge, which was a black cat sitting on a yellow moon for special occasions, such as a prize giving or Halloween. There was another uniform consisting of a long robe worn with a tall, pointed hat, but as these were black too, it didn't really make much of a change. There were so many rules that you couldn't do anything without being told off, and there seemed to be tests and exams every week. Mildred Hubble was in her first year at school. She was one of the people who always seemed to be in trouble, and she didn't exactly mean to break the rules and annoy the teachers, but things just seemed to happen whenever she was around. You could rely on Mildred to have her hat on back to front or her bootlaces trailing along the floor. She couldn't walk from one end of the corridor to the other without yelling at somebody. And nearly every night, she was writing lines or being kept in. Anyway, she had lots of friends, even if they did try and keep their distance in the potion laboratory. And her best friend, Maud, stayed loyally by her through everything, however hair-raising. They made a funny pair, for Mildred was tall and thin with long plaits, which she often chewed absent-mindedly, while Maud was short and tubby and had round glasses and wore the hair in bunches. On her first day at the academy, each pupil was given a broomstick and taught to ride it, which takes quite a long time, and it nearly isn't as easy as it looks. Halfway through the first term, they were each presented with a black kitten, which they trained to ride the broomsticks. The cats weren't for any practical purpose, except to keep tradition going. Some schools present owls instead, but it's just a matter of taste. Miss Cackle was a very traditional headmistress who did not believe in any newfangled nonsense, and trained her young witches to keep up all the customs that they had been taught in her young day. At the end of the first year, each pupil received a copy of the popular Book of Spells, a 3-inch thick volume bound in black leather. This was not really to be used, as they already had paperback editions for the classroom, but like the cats, it was another piece of tradition. Apart from yearly prize giving, there were no more presentations until the 5th and final year, when most pupils were awarded the Witch's High Certificate. It did not seem likely that Mildred would ever get that far. After only 2 days at the school, she crashed her broomstick into the yard, breaking the broomstick in half and bending her hat. She mended the stick with glue and sticky tape, and fortunately, it still flew, though there was an ugly bundle where the end joined, and sometimes it was rather difficult to control. This story really begins halfway through Mildred's first term, on the night before the presentation of the kittens. It was almost midnight, and the school was in darkness except for one narrow window lit softly by the glow of a candle. This was Mildred's room, where she was sitting in bed, wearing a pair of black and grey striped pyjamas and dropping off to sleep every few minutes. Maud was curled up on the end of the bed, enveloped in a grey flannel nightdress and a black woolen shawl. Each pupil had the same type of room, very simple, with a wardrobe, iron bedstead, table and chair, and a slit window like the ones used by archers in castles a long time ago. There was a picture rail along the bare walls, from which hung a sampler embroidered with a quotation from the Book of Spells, and also during the day several bats. Mildred had 3 bats in her room, little furry ones, which were very friendly. She was very fond of animals and was looking forward to the next day when she would have a kitten of her own. Everyone was excited about the presentation, and they had all spent the evening ironing their best robes and pushing the dents out of their hats. Maud was too excited to sleep, so had sneaked into Mildred's room to talk about it with her friend. "What are you going to call yours, Maud?" asked Mildred. "Midnight," said Maud. "I think it sounds dramatic." I'm worried about the whole thing," Mildred confessed, chewing the end of her plait. I'm sure I'll do something dreadful, like treading on its tail, or else it'll take one look at me and leap out of the window. Something's bound to go wrong." "Oh, don't be silly," said Maud. "You know you have a way with animals, and as for treading on its tail, it won't even be on the floor. Miss Cackle hands it to you, and that's all there is to it. So there's nothing to worry about, is there?" Before Mildred had time to reply, the door crashed open to reveal their form mistress, Miss Hardbroom, standing in the doorway. Wrapped in a black dressing gown with a lantern in her hand, she was a tall, terrifying lady with a sharp, bony face and black hair, scragged back into a tight knot on her forehead. Into a tight knot that made her forehead looked quite stretched. "Rather late to be up, isn't it, girls?" she inquired nastily. The girls, who had leapt into each other's arms when the door burst open, drew apart and fixed their eyes on the floor. "Of course, if we don't want to be included in the presentation tomorrow, we are certainly going about it the right way," Miss Hardbroom continued icily. "Yes, Miss Hardbroom," chorused the girls miserably. Miss Hardbroom glared meaningfully at Mildred's candle and swept out into the corridor with Maud in front of her. Mildred hastily blew out the candle and dived under the bedclothes, but she could not get to sleep. Outside the window, she could hear the owls hooting, and somewhere in the school a door had been left open and was creaking backwards and forwards in the wind. To tell you the truth, Mildred was afraid of the dark. But don't tell anybody. I mean, who ever heard of a witch who was scared of the dark? And that's the end of chapter 1, and we're going to go straight in to chapter 2. And here we've got one of the girls on the broomstick. The presentation took place in the Great Hall, a huge stone room with rows of wooden benches, a raised platform at one end, and shields and portraits all round the walls. The whole school had assembled, and Miss Cackle and Miss Hardbroom stood behind a table on the platform. On the table was a large wicker basket from which came mews and squeaks. First of all, everyone sang the school song, which went like this. "Onward, ever striding onward, proudly our brooms we fly, straight and true above the treetops, shadows on the moonlit sky. Never a day will pass before us when we have not tried our best, kept our cauldrons bubbling nicely, cast our spells and charms with zest. Full of joy we mix our potions, working by each other's side. When our days at school are over, let us think of them with pride." It was the usual type of school song, full of pride, joy and striving. Mildred had never yet mixed a potion with joy, nor flown her broomstick with pride. She was usually too busy trying to keep it upright. Anyway, when they had finished drowning the last verse, Miss Cackle rang the silver bell on her table, and the girls marched up in single file to get their kittens. Mildred was the last of all, and when she reached the table, Miss Cackle poured out the basket, not a sleek black kitten, like all the others, but a little tabby with white paws and the sort of fur that looked as if it had been out all night in the gale. "We've run out of black ones," explained Miss Cackle with a pleasant grin. Miss Hardbroom smiled too, but nastily. After the ceremony, everyone rushed to see Mildred's kitten. "I think HB had a hand in this somewhere," said Maud darkly. HB was the nickname for Miss Hardbroom. "I must admit, it does look a bit dim, doesn't it?" said Mildred, scratching the tabby kitten's head. "But I didn't really mind. I'll just have to think of another name. I was going to call it Sooty. Let's take them down to the playground and see what they make of broomstick riding." Almost all the first-year witches were in the yard trying to persuade their puzzled kittens to sit on their broomsticks. Several were already clinging on by their claws, and one kitten, belonging to a rather smug young witch named Ethel, was sitting bolt upright cleaning its paws, as if it had been riding a broomstick its whole life. Riding a broomstick was no easy matter, as I have mentioned before. First, you order the stick to hover, and it hovered lengthways above the ground. Then you sit on it, give it a sharp tap, and away you flew. Once in the air, you could make the stick do almost anything by saying right, left, stop, down a bit, and so on. The difficult part was balancing, for if you leaned a little too far to one side, you could easily overbalance, in which case you would either fall off or find yourself hanging upside down, and then you would just have to hold on with your skirt over your head until your friend came to rescue you. If it had taken Mildred several weeks of falling off and crashing before she could ride the broomstick reasonably well, and it looked as though her kitten was going to have the same trouble. When she put it on the end of the stick, it just fell off without even trying to hold on, and after many attempts, Mildred picked up her kitten and gave it a shake. "Listen," she said severely. "I think I shall have to call you stupid. You didn't even try to hold on. Everyone else is all right. Look at all your friends." The kitten gazed at her sadly and licked her nose with its rough tongue. "Oh, come on," said Mildred, softening her voice. "I'm not really angry with you. Let's just try again." And she put the kitten back on the broomstick, from which it fell with a thud. Maud was having better luck. Her kitten was hanging on grimly upside down. "Oh, well," laughed Maud. "It's a start." "Oh, mine's useless," said Mildred, sitting on the broomstick for a rest. "Never mind," Maud said. "Think how hard it must be for them to hang on by their claws." An idea flashed into Mildred's head as she dived into school, leaving her kitten chasing a leaf along the ground and the broomstick, still patiently hovering. She came out carrying her satchel, which she hooked over the end of the broom, and then bundled the kitten into it. The kitten's astounded face peeped out of the bag as Mildred flew delightedly round the yard. "Look, Maud!" she called from 10 feet up in the air. "That's cheating," said Maud, looking at the satchel. Mildred flew back and landed on the ground, laughing. "I don't think HB would approve," said Maud doubtfully. "Quite right, Maud," an icy voice behind them said. "Mildred, my dear, possibly it would be even easier with handlebars and a saddle." Mildred blushed. I'm sorry, Miss Hardbroom," she muttered. It doesn't balance very well, my kitten, so I thought perhaps..." Her voice trailed away under Miss Hardbroom's stony glare, and Mildred unhooked her satchel and turned the bewildered kitten on the ground. "Girls," Miss Hardbroom clapped her hands, "I would remind you that there is a potion test tomorrow morning, that is all." So saying, she disappeared, literally. "I wish you wouldn't do that," whispered Maud, looking at the place where their form mistress had been standing. "You're never quite sure where she's gone." "Right again, Maud," said Miss Hardbroom's voice from nowhere, and Maud gulped and hurried back to her kitten. Okay, and that's the end of chapter 2, and Mrs. Parsons will see you for chapter 3 and chapter 4. See you later.